Hi, everyone. I'm Cecelia Curtis, and this is the Friendship Tour, where we talk about the true gift of friendship with some of my truest friends. Today's guest is Tiffany Page Hurt she's from all over Okinawa, Japan, San Antonio, Texas, but she now lives in Northern California by way of the United States Air Force. Tiffany and I met in Japan in 2008. And when I moved to California about 8 years ago, I was thrilled to learn that she was already here and she was working at the same base where my husband now works. I'm really embarrassed to say that we've only hung out a few times since I moved here, but life. So I'm just really excited that she said yes and that we're reconnecting today. And I've been looking forward to today's conversation on first impressions for months. Hi, Tiffany.
Hey, Cecelia. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me.
I am so happy to have you. I'm so glad you said yes. It's such a joy to see your face. It's been a while since I've seen you face to face. So I'm just so happy. I'm so happy to see you.
Me too. Me too. And thanks for having me. And we always say it's been too long,
I
but
know.
life just happens. And here we are. And I feel honored and blessed that you asked me to be a part of this.
Well, I feel honored and blessed that you said yes. Yeah. So tell me, I think I know the answer to this, but I wonder if you know the answer to this. How or where did we meet?
Goodness. Well, we definitely met at Yokota Air Base, Japan, when our families were both stationed there. It was specifically at the Yokota East Chapel. I believe, as I recall, Raphael and I were head of the greeting ministry. And so
Okay.
we would be at the front doors greeting everybody coming in. And when you and Brian were looking for a church home, I believe that's how we first met. So, yeah.
Okay, that's consistent with what I was thinking. I was thinking we probably met at church at the chapel. What was your favorite friendship moment? Like something you and I did together? I know it's been a while, but is there anything that stands out to you?
Absolutely. I would say it was when you invited me over to your house.
Where?
When we were, I think we were at church. I think you and Brian may have approached Raphael and I was like, you guys should come over for dinner.
Oh, in Japan.
Yeah, in Japan.
Oh, okay, okay.
And I
Yeah.
believe that was my favorite moment because for those of you who don't know about the military and the rank structure, Brian is an officer and Rafa and I were enlisted. And so you don't really see those relationships mixing that much. But being that overseas is a little bit more unique and we weren't like in the same chain of command or organization, it was more acceptable, you
Mm,
know? And so that
yeah.
was something that Ralph and I had thought about in the past. Like, man, we would love to be their friends, but
Yeah.
we're just not sure. And then when you invited us over, we're like, oh man, we could actually be friends. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
probably my favorite moment.
Yeah. And we had a good time that night. I don't remember what we ate, but I remember you stayed a while and we talked and you had the kids and
Yeah,
it was a good night. It was a good night.
it was a really good night.
Yeah. Can I tell you my favorite friendship moment?
Yes, please.
And it may not have been a big deal to you, but it was a huge deal to me.
Okay.
So when I moved here, of course, didn't know anyone, military family. And when I moved here, I think I was 36 weeks pregnant.
Mm,
So the whole time before the baby was born was just trying to get set up in the house and be ready for when he got here. And then he was here, and there wasn't really any social stuff happening in my life. It
mm,
was, we didn't know anyone, and I just had a baby.
yeah.
And I finally connected with you, and you were like, let's go out. And it just felt, I was excited, but it felt like a little bit of a chore. I mean, you're a mother, you know how it is. So I was like, well, I have the baby and I got to get dressed and okay. But you took care of everything. You planned this perfect evening. You came and you picked me up. We had such an amazing time.
You did.
And I didn't know how much I needed that, as a new mother, as a woman, as a friend. That was the first time I probably went out kind of socially after having a baby and being here in California. So I needed that more than you knew. And I remember coming home thinking, I think I talked her head off. I just talked, I felt like I talked nonstop all night. And you were like, mm hmm, mm hmm. But I felt like I needed it. I needed to get out. I needed to be with someone else who understood kind of what I had been through and what I
Yeah.
was going through. And you met that need in my life that day. So thank you. Thank you for
Oh
doing that.
man, thank you for bringing that back to my memory. Because I don't remember you talking my head off at all. I remember us having, I
I
don't
don't
know. It's
know.
so funny how we can get in our own heads about things, right?
Yeah.
And you're reconnecting and things like that. But I thought it was a beautiful night, and
Yeah.
I'm just happy that you created the space because it is hard.
Yeah.
You have a baby, you just kind of go into this space of just like you and the baby and the family.
Yeah.
So I felt like it was important for me to let you know that I was there,
Yeah.
that I'm always here. And
Thank you.
yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, you're really great about that. Like we don't communicate all that frequently, but I feel like if I reach out to you, it's always going to be cool. We're always going to pick right back up where we left off. So thank you for being that kind of person.
Always, always. I'm always here for that. I feel like connection is the most important thing in life.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any days, times, or years.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. So when I sat down, it was actually about this time last year when I first started thinking about the friendship tour. When I first sat down and I started thinking about it, I thought about you. And, we've just had this warm conversation about our good times together, but I thought about how our first few interactions went. Those first impressions and maybe even the second, third, like fourth impressions.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about because I talk to so many people who tell me about the tough time they're having making friends or they meet people and they seem sketchy or
Mhm.
everyone has these stories that some of them are just not positive stories and I'm like,
Yeah.
really, really? But if I really think about my friends and my own stories, I have some of my own stuff that I'm like, thank God we became friends. Like, how did that even happen?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, our first few encounters and first impressions.
Hmm.
Um, can I tell you how things went down from my perspective? And then I would like to hear, of course, I want to hear your perspective too.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
Please tell me about myself, my past
I'm
life.
gonna tell you. I'm gonna tell you. And you're gonna tell me, I'm sure. Well, I had just moved to Japan. Like I was brand new to the base. Again, I didn't really know anyone. And I felt like I would see you around the base. I would see you running or working out, or I would see you at the church on base. And you always seemed like the sweetest, kindest, most beautiful person. Your kids were adorable. You were active in ministry. You just seemed really great. But then when I was around, you seemed a little bit standoffish. It's like if I saw you from a distance, amazing person. If I saw you and I was trying to be one on one with you, you just seemed a little bit standoffish.
Mm,
Never mean, never ever mean. You were always kind, but you just seemed more reserved with me than I saw you being with other people.
mm,
And for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. Like
yeah.
I felt like I had just moved there, so what was the deal?
Yeah.
And usually when I feel like people don't like me, I have a pretty good idea why. It's like not a mystery. I did something, I said something,
Yeah.
but I didn't feel like I had engaged with you enough for either of us to have these feelings. So I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. Um, but then somehow, and I don't know how, somehow you and I ended up just one on one at this little coffee shop in just outside the gate. It was this cute little coffee shop, very, very cute and yet very smoky. Do you remember like people would smoke inside the little
Yeah.
coffee shop and they had great sandwiches and it was cute for girl talk, but it was so very smoky. But somehow you and I ended up there together.
Hmm.
And I don't know how it went down exactly, but the way I remember it, it feels like we sat down and we both kind of blurted out, I thought you didn't like me. Do you remember that? Do you remember that day or that conversation or anything leading up to it?
It's interesting because I don't remember all the details, but I remember the feeling. You
Mhm.
know, I remember that there was something about you, and I guess you saw the same thing me, that we just had to get to
Yeah.
know each other.
Yeah.
And I think that I know for me, when I think about where I was at in my life and how old I was and how insecure I was as a woman and
Mm,
trying to figure out who I was in God and the military as a wife at the time and just a mother, like I had all these hats. And I remember seeing you and just the way that you described me off of first impression without engaging with me directly or being close with me, that's how I felt about you. I was like, man, I
no.
see her working out, you know, she seems to have a really great marriage and just all these things. And those were things that I admired. So you had this like sureness about you. So I
Mm,
think that when you came around, it kind of made me a little insecure.
mm,
So that's what I was thinking as I started to like unpack like my initial thoughts and then our initial interactions and stuff. I was like, man, I admire her, but I was so intimidated,
mm,
essentially. Yeah.
mm.
And that just came from my own self. It had nothing to do with you. So, however, we ended up at that cafe. We arrived there and we felt the same way. I mean, at least for me.
I cannot figure out how we would have ended up there feeling the way we did, but one of us must have been like, we got to figure this out. I don't know who. I don't know if it was you or me, but one of us must have just been like, we got to figure this out.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, that's interesting that you said the things you said because you've never said those things before.
yeah.
And I didn't
Mhm.
know, I certainly didn't know you felt that way. I think when I first got to the base, I mean, we all have our insecurities about things.
Yeah.
I had just finished graduate school and
Mm.
Brian told me we're moving to Japan. And I was like, "What?" Um, and I remember the day he called, I was at home and I just spun around in my chair and I stared out the window for hours. I
Mm.
mean, I was not prepared to move to
Right.
Japan. I mean, I don't it was probably an hour. It was probably and I'm not exaggerating. It was
Yeah.
probably a solid hour. But I kind of felt like we moved there and I moved there at a time that I thought I was about to kick off my career. And instead, I felt like it was getting stalled
Yeah.
because we moved to Japan. And this was when we first got there. I did go on and have a job that I really enjoyed. But when we first got there, I would look at women like you, the active duty women and the women with the great jobs, and you had kids, and I didn't have kids.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, she is younger than me and she is crushing it right now. That's how I felt.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we all bring these things to our interactions with other people and we
Mm.
bring them. It's not
Yeah.
even stuff other people are doing, it's stuff that we're bringing ourselves. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Cannot agree more.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I had no idea.
Mhm.
But that day at the little cafe or the little coffee shop, we did try to figure out why we weren't cool with one another.
Mhm.
None of what we just said came out that day. So I think that shows how we've both grown
Yeah.
and evolved as women. I mean, we're talking about things that happened 15 years ago at this point.
Goodness.
Um so we were both younger and we've both grown since then. But
Mm.
that day at the coffee shop, we communicated we didn't like each other or we thought the other one didn't like one another. And I remember saying, "Well, why did you think that? I just moved here. Why did you think I didn't like you?" And you said, "Well, I would see you at church and you never smiled at me." And I was like, "When did I never smile at you? I just moved here."
Yeah.
And you said, "Well, I smiled at you and I said hi and you said nothing back." And
Mm.
I was like, "That doesn't make any sense, Tiffany. That's not me. I must have said something back."
Yeah.
And you were so sure. You were so sure about this encounter.
Mm.
So I thought about it and I said, "Well, when was it?" And you gave me a time frame. And I was like, "Ah, you're right. I didn't say hi and I didn't smile
Mm.
because I had dental surgery."
Yeah.
And it was a pretty major dental surgery. Nobody could see the stitches,
Yeah.
but just inside my lip, I had stitches inside my mouth. And
Mm.
it wasn't a big deal because no one knew me. So it just wasn't a big deal,
Mm.
except it was
Yeah.
because that's when you met me. This went on for weeks. I was eating I was drinking Boost and Ensure and eating pudding for weeks while my mouth healed
Mhm.
and not really going anywhere because I didn't want to meet people and seem grumpy and not friendly.
Mhm.
And we lived so close to the church, it did not make sense for us not to go to church.
Mhm.
It was just a walk across the parking lot and we were at the church.
Yeah.
So my husband Brian's like, "Look, you've been in the house with your stiff face for weeks. Let's just." He was like, "We got to go somewhere. You're driving me crazy, you're driving yourself crazy. Let's just go to church today."
Yeah.
So that was the day I met you.
Mm.
I went to the church and I went around, didn't smile, didn't say hi to anyone,
Mhm.
and that was what you remembered,
Yeah.
that I didn't smile at you. And last season I talked with a friend about making new friends and how do you know that someone is friend potential. And she kind of just said, do they look friendly? Do they smile? Do they look warm in their eyes? Basic stuff.
Yeah.
And that day, I failed that test. I
Mm.
didn't look friendly to you.
Mhm.
And nobody knew. I mean, probably until this day, people at Yakota didn't know I had that dental surgery
Mhm.
because I was so new. Nobody had to know.
Yeah.
But you and I encountered one another at a time that I just couldn't look friendly.
Mm.
And it almost derailed our friendship. And then we both had these insecurities and other things going on.
Mhm.
But somehow we just kind of pushed through and we found each other.
We did.
I could smile again and I don't know. And we ended up at the coffee shop, which I think is amazing. I do.
I
I
do
do.
too.
So we all hear this expression that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about first impressions?
You know, um, Back in the day, I would say that they definitely mattered more back then because that was, I guess you could say, a conditioning of mine. You
Yeah,
present well and things like that. But now that I've had more life experience and I haven't always showed up with the perfect disposition, right?
right.
Um,
That's directed at you. The
yeah,
right was not directed at you. It was for
yeah.
me. I'm sorry.
No, no, me too. Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm owning my stuff too. I mean, I have days, where I don't feel like being outside and
Yeah.
I just want to be at home, but I have these obligations where I have to interact, you
Hmm.
know? And so now, I don't believe that first impressions are lasting or that they hold the most weight or anything like that. I mean, our relationship is a prime example of that. I felt like
Yeah.
we had a do-over. Like I felt
Yeah.
like we had to essentially get out of our own ways, And especially with us coming together in church. There's that too. There's more to explore there. So I know for me that I no longer, if I meet somebody and say I don't get a good vibe from them, I'm learning that it could just be a day. I don't know what they may need in that moment. And so now I'm the kind of person where if I see somebody who is kind of standoffish, doesn't want to be bothered, I almost go outside of my way even more.
Hmm.
I don't know what people are dealing with. I mean, I
Yeah.
even do that when I go out and eat or go to the drive-thru. I'm like, even before I give my order or anything, I'm like, how's your day going? And
Hmm.
times out of 10, a lot of people are like, no one ever asked me how I'm doing,
Hmm.
So I definitely don't think that first impressions are everything. I don't. I think that we have to give each other time and space to show up in a way that, you know, is more natural to us. And at first, we have trust issues, boundaries, things like that. So
Yeah.
that comes into play too, right?
Very, very true.
Yeah.
Um, I think I've often been called reserved, throughout my life. And I think I just need to warm up to people though. I try to look friendly, but I know that I'm someone who warms up slowly. I want to understand who people are and I want them to understand who I really am. But if you need to see it all on day one, you're probably not going to see it. You're probably not you're probably not going to know who I am, on day one.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with
Yeah.
that.
And I
Yeah.
actually admire that quality about you because I used to be so desperate for people to like me that I would
Hmm.
share so much about myself,
Hmm.
you know? And I've learned to become more reserved. and to give it time and to be a slow burn, basically.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I talked about this with my friend Alex. I think I've learned to be more open and honest in a more reasonable period of time. As a result of my friendship with her. I also met her in Japan, but she would just be like, "Oh, honey, let it out. Like you don't have to hold that stuff in."
I love that.
And I was always kind of a slow burn, to put
Mhm.
it in your terms, but definitely much slower.
Yeah.
And I've learned over time to just open up a little bit more. I
Mm.
mean, bosses used to tell me, "Just tell us more. We want to know more about you." And I was like, "You don't need to know more about me. You need to know if I do my job or I don't do my job." Just basic stuff. But if enough people say it, you can start reflecting and say, "Well, maybe there's something to that. Maybe I need to share a little bit more, be slightly more open."
Yeah.
So why do you think we ended up at the coffee shop? I know that we don't remember who invited whom, but what do you think made us be open to it? Just open to saying yes. Why do you think we even showed up despite our reservations about one another?
I think there was a part of me that needed you, you know?
Hmm.
And when I say that, I remember that time in my life, and I didn't have a lot of women that I could really look up to,
Hmm.
you know? Like I said earlier, like I admired you kind of from afar. And then once I got to know you, I was like, oh man, she has her master's and all these things. I think right around that time, I had just finished my undergrad degree and I had
Hmm.
aspirations to just figure out my life outside of the Air Force because the Air Force wasn't really something that I wanted to do or join. It was honestly just something that was convenient, especially since
Hmm.
I married Raphael and stuff. And I was like, okay, this sounds like something that I want to do. But then when I met you, you were very inspiring. And that was just
Hmm.
from a professional space. But then once I got to know you personally, like, man, she is a beautiful soul. And,
Oh,
she is herself. And that was something that I was looking for, somebody that knew themselves. So, yeah, of
wow. Thank you, Tiffany.
course.
I'm not often surprised on the podcast when we have the conversations because I've kind of planned some of the topics.
Yeah.
So you're definitely someone who has managed to surprise me a couple times in this conversation. But
Sorry.
thank you. No, I mean they're
Yeah.
good surprises. I
Yeah.
didn't know this is how you felt back then. So thank you. Thank you for
You're
sharing
welcome.
that.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for allowing this space for me to finally share and just really being thought about it.
Yeah,
Sometimes we don't really think about the small details that actually hold the most weight, right?
right.
Yeah.
Right. So, what do you think? I feel like you kind of talked a little bit about this well, I'll just ask the question. What do you think people should do if maybe they're not connecting or vibing with someone immediately? Do you think they should kind of just keep pressing through or like, nah, it's good?
I'm
Like,
all about the pressure. I'm all about the pressure. So,
yeah, like what do you do and how do you know what to do? What determines if you go forward or if you go your separate ways forever? What are your thoughts?
so for me, it's always been about, I don't know. I mean, I could look at this in several different ways, right? So I allow things to happen naturally, right?
Mhm.
But then where I'm at right now in my life, I'm very purposeful. I'm in purpose. All my relationships contribute to who I am and who I'm becoming, right? And so
Yeah.
if I see someone that the vibe may be off or there may be something I need to get to know, I give it time and space. I'm very patient. And I'm always like, hey, if this person's supposed to be in my life, then they will be in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't matter a time or nothing like that. But I always like to give it space. And then there are those times when I might just strike up a random conversation and that may be something that they need, you know?
Mm.
So I really trust the process. I don't put a lot of pressure unless I'm like, if I see somebody several times in a week, I have this kind of a rule of thumb. If I see somebody 2 to 3 times in a week, then that's something that, and then not a routine, like if I see somebody at the gym and I
Right.
at different times or something like that, and they just so happen to be there at that time, I'm like, okay, maybe I need to figure out how to interact in some way, shape, or form. And so I just kind of trust my gut
Hmm.
Go with the flow. And it may be something that may be temporary, maybe a temporary relationship, or maybe
Right.
that can grow into, a lifelong relationship. Who knows? Right. But I'm always open because we just don't know who we need and what we need in those moments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I think that trusting your gut would probably be my
Mm,
answer too. There was something about you, even though it felt like our relationship was off. There
mhm.
was something about you that I still felt like I want to be her friend. I don't know why she doesn't want to be my friend. So, yeah, I think there was something in there, and there was some chemistry, there was something in my gut, or maybe there was some discernment. I don't know, but there was something that made me want to keep pushing to get to know you better, for sure.
Well, I appreciate that because a lot of people don't try to push to be my friend. Sometimes,
Aw.
and I'm okay. I've learned to be okay with that. It's a little different now.
Yeah.
But before, like, it wasn't like that. Like,
Mm.
they have their mind made up about me, and unfortunately, I had to accept it. And actually, there was this other young lady at the chapel that said the same thing about me. She thought I was stuck up and everything, and I was like, "What do you mean?" She was like, "Well, you just had this disposition, this aura about you that was just very." I was like, "Oh man, well."
Mm.
I don't know where that came from, but she's like, I'm happy I got to talk to you because it's the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Just like you said, hey, I need to work on being more open. I needed to learn on fixing my face, apparently. So,
Well, I think you have a lovely face for what it's worth.
thank
I
you.
think you have a lovely face.
You too.
Do you have any advice for someone who believes she maybe made a bad first impression?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As someone who has had a trend of making bad first impressions, um, to not take it so personally. I think sometimes we think that we think too deeply into things. We're too harsh with ourselves. We always feel like we have to be perfect, but no one's perfect, right? No
Yeah.
relationship is ever perfect. And I would rather have somebody see me at my worst and accept me in those worst moments than to, for me to present myself in this perfect package only
And
to,
then fall from grace.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
exactly, you hit I mean, that word is so important, grace. I want for people to be able to always show me grace. And I hope that I could reciprocate that too. And so, for individuals who may not, have the best first impression, for them to be patient with themselves and to always understand that, your people are going to be your people, regardless of
Yeah.
how you encounter each other based off of a first impression.
So true. So
Yeah.
true. Your people are your people.
Yeah.
That's true.
Absolutely.
Just based upon our relationship, the only piece of advice I would add, I think everything you said was amazing and spot on and gives me plenty to think about.
Hmm.
The only thing I would add is if you meet someone like a Tiffany and you're like, she's great. I want to be friends with her, but maybe I just got it wrong the first time. Just
Hmm.
be honest. Be like, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I think
Yeah.
just owning up to it or addressing the elephant that's in the room. Maybe you don't know why you got off on a wrong foot, but just addressing it. And that gives space to like clear the air and start
Hmm.
over. Like let's just start over. And
Absolutely.
um that's what I think I learned from our first few encounters and then watching our relationship, you know, evolve from there.
Yeah.
Just clear the air, clear the air.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Oh, Tiffany, this conversation was everything I thought it would be. It was absolutely everything I thought it would be.
Oh, man.
Um,
Makes my heart happy.
yeah, I love you. I
Love you too.
Now that we're talking again, I'm thinking so fondly of the times we have had together,
Hmm.
and we need to update it. We need to create some more memories and have some more time together for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then with us having three sons each at
I
that, I mean, we
know.
have so much in common and so much to even explore there, you know.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's important. I think it's overdue, like I keep saying, like it's
I
so
know.
overdue.
It
And
is.
life
It
happens,
is.
and with you creating this podcast and reconnecting with everyone you walked with, I mean, it just gives us another opportunity to create another chapter.
Amen. I love that. Well, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for talking today. Thank you even more for giving me a second chance, maybe even a second, third, and fourth chance, because if you had not, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be friends, and we certainly wouldn't be on the friendship tour. So thank you for being you.
Thank you for being you too.
All right, let's hang up and let's figure out when we're going to lunch or dinner or whatever it is we're going to do.
Sounds perfect.
Okay, bye.
Bye.